Okay, great. We're live? All right, perfect. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's really, this has been a great conference so far. I'm really honored to be here and be presenting along with all the other guests. I've really learned a lot today. My name is Morsi. I'm founder and CEO of DevNull Productions. DevNull Productions is a small early stage startup who is focused on blockchain data, analytics, and intelligence services. And today I'm going to be talking about several nuances, several lessons that we've learned, and other things, challenges, and solutions to those challenges that come into play for those that are interested in blockchain data. So without further ado, let's jump on into the slides. All right, perfect. So jumping right on into it. As many of you have heard, data is the new commodity, right? We live in a data-driven economy, a data-driven world. There is also a plethora of companies that have emerged in recent years that geared around providing data services and intelligence. Whenever you go to the store or whenever you purchase an item online, data is being collected about you, whether you like it or not. So these data, collection trends provide retailers, provide businesses from all walks and all backgrounds with a lot of information as far as consumer habits, as far as inventory and requirements, and so on and so forth. This data is very valuable, not only for the stores and the retailers themselves, but for a whole slew of other ancillary providers that use that data for marketing purposes and for consumer intelligence and for many other use cases. As you all may have heard, one of the latest or the hot sayings these days is data is the new oil, and it really is. When it comes down to it, data is what kind of greases the economy, what kind of keeps the markets efficient, running efficiently, and provides a lot of valuable insights which facilitate liquidity as well as many other critical aspects of the modern ecosystem. In addition to that, data is quickly becoming the business model. Traditional retail and subscription business models are somewhat fading. You're seeing less and less companies focusing on sales of products, for example, or even if they do, the products themselves aren't the center of the attention. Rather, it's the data around those products and who they collect and the information about the users of those products. So, a company that's been in the news today, Robinhood, is a perfect example of this. But other companies such as OkCupid on the dating scene, Venmo, and many other companies provide their services for free. But as you know, there really is no free lunch. Free is not free. And what the users are providing is valuable data into their trends, into the preferences that drive those consumption choices. So enter the blockchain. The blockchain affords sensorless and transparent transactions. We all know and love it. There are trade-offs. Not every transaction that you engage in, that everyone engages in, might necessarily people might not be interested in that being transparent for the world, but it is great in many use cases. The data is available for anyone to access, and for those that have the knowledge of how to access that, that can provide some very lucrative opportunities. Of course, there are caveats to that. If it was simple, everyone would do it, and we would all be rich as a result of it. But let's talk about some of the challenges that one would encounter when trying to access and leverage that data on the blockchain. So modern blockchain technologies facilitate thousands of transactions per second. XRP and XLM are two major cryptocurrencies which DevNull Productions focuses on. And at the base level, those facilitate 1,500 to 5,000 transactions per second. If you're using kind of specialized technologies such as payment channels and XRP and so on and so forth, well, that can facilitate up to 50,000 transactions per second, which is a large amount of data to process. So again, this provides very lucrative opportunities, but it requires some expertise and some care in order to leverage those. So step one, collect the data. Uptime is a critical component when it comes to interfacing with the blockchain. Markets and these blockchain services are provided on a 24 hours a day, 365 days a year basis. Essentially, if your services, your collection services are down, you're missing valuable data. And if you're missing valuable data in this data-driven economy, means that you're not making money. So to mitigate this, you really want to focus on distributing and diversifying the infrastructure which provides your services. If you are running on the cloud, for example, but your servers are located in one data center, for example, here in New York or in San Francisco, well, network outages, geographical network outages are not uncommon. Perhaps not as common as they have been in the past, but it's still known to happen. And, you know, every once in a while we hear things like EC2 going down, a data center, and all sorts of online services are impacted as a result of it. So you really want to distribute your computational infrastructure around the world as best as you can. Of course, there are costs that are entailed in that, and depending on the size of your startup or your business, that may or may not make sense, but the more you distribute, the better. So, for example, we have some code here where that demonstrates how to interface with the various blockchains I just discussed. On the left-hand side, you see some logic in order to interface with XRP Ledger, and on the right is with XLM. In both cases, for example, looking at XRP to begin with, we import the library and we connect to the server. Then we establish a connection. After establishing a connection, we start listening to ledgers. Ledgers are blocks in the XRP world. Block is ledger, ledger is a block. And when those are received from the network, we call this on-ledger close callback. Now, with XRP, it kind of makes more sense to parse the units, parse the ledgers themselves atomically, because those provide kind of snapshots. Those provide points which, if for whatever reason we have an issue with importing transactions from a given ledger, a given block, we can simply discard those transactions, fix the issues with our infrastructure, with our software, and then start replaying the blocks from that ledger. So in this case, whenever we are notified of a ledger being closed, a block being closed, we receive the full details as far as the transactions and the data included in that block. And then in the callback on retrieve ledger at the bottom, we store those in the database atomically. We store the transactions, we record which ledger the last ledger we handled and we parsed, and then we're good to go to handle the next one. On the right, very similar logic for Stellar, for the XLM ledger. In this case, we import the library and connect to the server, start streaming transactions, and at the bottom in the transaction handler, we store those to the database. Now, unlike XRP, each transaction comes with a transaction cursor, which allows us to resume streaming from that transaction directly. So instead of just listening to the ledgers themselves, we can listen to transactions on an individual basis. And for whatever reason, if we have to resume that streaming, we can start and stop based on the transaction cursor. So essentially, this is how we would pull data in from the blockchain using the APIs, using the kind of the provided interfaces which to pull the data in. Now, there's additional advanced mechanisms which one can leverage, a developer can leverage to interface with the blockchain protocols. For example, one could communicate with the overlay on the overlay networks themselves. Now, the overlays are the protocols which are used in between blockchain nodes to communicate with each other. Essentially, these consist of structured binary data and to leverage these, it requires advanced knowledge of message framing and transports. These sort of things typically aren't documented in the kind of the end user or end developer documentation that are available on the blockchain websites. But the benefit of communicating at this layer is it allows you to front run blockchain traffic. you're really receiving first-class access to the internode blockchain communication, and you get first access to the data as it's being sent and distributed through these decentralized networks. There is one big caveat, though. Data at this layer may not be validated, including the final blockchain. So, if you're a market maker or you're trying to develop a system, a data model based on this early intelligence, you should incorporate the notion that, transactions that are being relayed across the network at this level may not be included in validated blocks. It might be useful, it might not, but it is another option that you have. Here's an example of the XRP binary protocol. So on the right, you can see the fields that constitute the transaction message, which are sent around between nodes. You can leverage one of our open source libraries called XRBP, available on GitHub, to communicate that level, to listen for traffic very easily. We're not showing kind of the details of that right here. If you want, you can go into that library. It's well documented and well tested, and find out all the nuances of how it works and how to communicate yourself with XRP at this level. Here is a similar example for XLM. On the right, you see the format of what will ultimately be the binary transaction that is sent through the network. It's relayed in a format called XDR, Extensible Data Representation. And on the left, you see the API calls to parse that data. The third and final way to collect data from the blockchain is perhaps the most advanced and is not for the faint of heart. It's essentially entails reading the binary data from the blockchain on disk directly. Again, this requires advanced knowledge of the data structures and custom storage solutions which the blockchain uses, and almost all of this is undocumented. You really have to dig into the source code behind these networks and kind of understand how data is serialized and deserialized from the disk in order to be able to efficiently read and leverage that data. Additionally, there are risks involved in this, right? You're communicating, you're reading from a system, a database that is a live database and is being read and written to by the blockchain node. So there's a lot of nuances involved in communication at this level. And, to be fair, most people are not going to want to do this, but it affords direct first-rate access at those data as they're being read and written to on the disk. If you're interested in this, without kind of going through all the nitty-gritty details, we do have several proprietary solutions in this sector. Contact DevNull Productions via the contact details at the end of these slides. So as I mentioned before, a lot of besides the initial using the API calls to interface with the blockchain, a lot of this is not, these solutions are not for the faint of heart and require some advanced knowledge of these technologies. Understanding the source code behind these cryptocurrencies, these distributed ledgers, is a critical aspect of this. Luckily, all the source code, and as far as I know, every blockchain is open source and is available on GitHub. So it is accessible. If you go to our XRP intelligence site, xrpintel.com, we provide a source code analysis of the Ripple D source code, the project driving the XRP ledger, and it helps you kind of jump into the water very quickly. This is an important aspect too about these blockchain technologies. A lot of individuals discuss the kind of importance of decentralizing the networks, which is a very critical aspect, no matter the blockchain, but distributing the contributions to the source code and distributing the understanding of the technology that governs these networks is also critical. So I encourage all that are of a technical background to pick your favorite blockchain and get involved with the community there. It's will go a long way to show how decentralized and distributed it is. So a few final notes when it comes to collecting data. As mentioned before, blockchain is a 24-hour-a-day, 7 days a week technology. You really can't afford much, if any, downtime. Even a few minutes of downtime will result in a lot of data, a data backlog, which will be hard to recover from. You're going to need to spin up systems in parallel, crunch that data, and it's going to cost time and resources, which if you process the data on a rolling basis, you won't run into those issues. System maintenance happens though. We have to take down systems and servers and even databases from time to time for maintenance, for server upgrades and all of that. If you can, try to plan that in advance, try to take them down for the shortest amount of time possible. And then when you spin them back up again, start processing transactions and ledgers serially, to the best of your ability. If you have to process things in parallel, make sure you ultimately serialize the data so that, if accounts are sending, especially high volume accounts, are sending data back and forth to each other, at the end of the day, the final snapshot, the final data set you're operating on is sanitized, it's validated. You're sure that in your database reflects the current state of the blockchain and there are no discrepancies. So we have the data in our database. Now what do we do with it? Well, of course, we aggregate the information we need. And in a lot of cases, you're not going to need the entire history of the blockchain. For example, if you're a retailer, you're only going to be interested in the accounts that correspond to your customers. Or if you're a market maker, a currency trader, you're only interested in the order books of the currencies that you're monitoring, you're watching. So the rest of the data can be discarded, really. You don't have to replicate the behavior of the blockchain. The blockchain is responsible for the peer-to-peer communication. The blockchain is responsible for storing the data on the disk persistently. You can retrieve that anytime. So once you process the data, discard it. You don't need to hold on to it forever, and you can really save on storage costs and processing power when you do that. So here we have a few examples of how we process the XRP data for our analytics. At the top, you can see that we're processing data for the given month. We start at the beginning of the month and finish at the end of the month. The next metric reads from the accounts table. We look for accounts created between the start and end and count them. And after that, we divide by the number of seconds in the month to retrieve the average account creation rate. After that, we retrieve the ledgers that have been closed in between the start and the finish and retrieve the first and last ledger. And then next, we retrieve the transactions of the type payment within those ledgers. This type of query can be used to retrieve offers, can be used to retrieve created trust lines. Really, at this point, you can retrieve any type of data that you're interested in. We determine the average number of payments per ledger in this time frame. And lastly, we retrieve the total fees paid in this time frame. If you're interfacing with the blockchain, depending on the network, with XRP and XLM, the fees are flat. And currently, we're nowhere near full capacity. The blockchain can handle a lot more data traffic than it currently does. But for other cryptocurrencies, such as Bitcoin or Ethereum, where fees can vary and periods of high traffic can really impact the performance of your application, you will want to derive these type of metrics, and you will want to gain this insight in order to determine when is best to send your transactions across a network and to derive all sorts of statistics along those lines. So continuing forward, we just mentioned that in many use cases, you're not going to need the full access to data, the access to the full data set. But there are some use cases which you do. For example, if you are developing an auditing or a forensic solution and you need a historical record of a large number of accounts or something similar, you can't really escape importing the full data set into your database. Traditional relational databases might not, scale up to suit your needs in this case. Depending on your infrastructure, they might, but there are many alternatives which you can use in order to effectively query and be able to use the full data set effectively. For example, NoSQL and graph databases, particularly we've had a lot of great luck with Neo4j. These provide great solutions in order to run some advanced queries against large data sets. Now, every database is going to have to be optimized. You're going to have to spend, this is a whole field, a whole science of its own. And you're going to have to spend a bit of time really tweaking indexes, tweaking garbage collection, tweaking a lot of server parameters, your hardware, your software, et cetera, in order to satisfy the queries that you want to run against your particular data set. But again, you're going to have to take it on a case-by-case basis, depending on your use case and what you want to use to extract, what type of value you want to extract from the data set. And that's it for processing the data. So we've collected the data, we've processed it. Now we have some valuable metrics in our database, but if it just resides in our database, what good is that? Your clients need to access that in one form or another, whether you're going to provide them through fixed data sets or APIs, that's going to depend on the need of your client. Fixed data sets, facilitate one-off billing scenarios with low overhead. So these are good where a client needs a particular bit of data. You can scope out a kind of one-time payment, a one-time cost for that data, and you can provide it to them as a kind of a one-off deal. Now, as we mentioned before, blockchain entails a lot of data, and blockchain analytics is no exception to this. So this is also beneficial in the scenario where you don't have to worry about setting up servers to provide that data on demand. You can aggregate your statistics, aggregate your data, excuse me, write them to the disk and ship that disk via FedEx, and it could arrive there by tomorrow if you use overnight shipping. Andrew Tenenbaum, a well-known computer scientist who wrote many influential books in the 1980s, has the famous quote, "Never underestimate the bandwidth of a station wagon full of tapes hurling down the highway." On the flip side, most data providers in 2021 and in recent years provide an API, a programmatic interface, which data is exposed and can be offered on a subscription basis for recurring revenue. Again, this requires infrastructure and this requires servers and maintenance costs, but these do allow startups and businesses to derive revenue theoretically indefinitely in the future. HTTP, the World Wide Web, is a common delivery mechanism. Certainly isn't the only one. There's protocols FTP, which has kind of since gone out of flavor, out of fashion, but SCP, all sorts of proprietary and open source messaging protocols. Those can be used to deliver data to the client depending on their needs. Now, there's obviously a lot of nuances. There are a lot of edge cases which you need to account for. Caching your data is critical in the case of providing an API. If a client sends a query to retrieve some data and then they send that query again, or a different client sends that same query, why should your database be impacted? Performance of your database, where you can use a key value solution such as Redis, that's a popular one, to cache the data and the results of that query. Of course, you're going to want to set an expiration on that query so that when new data comes in, or that when a certain amount of time goes by, you can refresh that and retrieve new results. But that's all configurable with these technologies. Of course, if you provide any data, whether it's publicly or provided behind a subscription wall or something similar, you're going to want to limit requests. You're going to want to provide rate filtering and all of that so that your services aren't abused. If you're providing data on the web scrapers are going to pull that data and they're going to hit it as hard as they can. And that's going to take an impact on your paying customers. So be sure that you tier your services and that clients or users can't impact the performance and degrade that for other users. Here we have an example of our API endpoint, through which we provide our reports. So we see that when a GET request, when a HTTP request for reports come in with specified parameters, this function gets called. The periods, whether they're requesting monthly reports, weekly reports, daily, etc. That's one of the first parameters that we parse. We return data in the JSON format, which is a very common data format for resources being served over the web. We cache the query again, so that if other users issue the same query, we can just look that up and we don't have to hit the database. And then we limit the amount of data that the user is able to retrieve at a given time for the reasons we just mentioned before pulling it from the DB and returning it in JSON. And that's it. Now we've collected the data, we've processed the data, and we're providing the data via our API. Now, many of your clients aren't going to want to leverage the, a programmatic interface for their purposes. A lot of clients are interested in a more abstract, a visual delivery mechanism for the data, and API access will be unneeded. Of course, the opposite is true too. There are many clients which want to integrate the data you're providing in a programmatic solution, in a trading bot, for example, or some other scenario, and they really have no use for the visualization, for the pretty graphs and all of that. So make sure you talk to your client and ascertain their needs before building your tools. But for those that want to the visual aspect of it, providing a website or an app is a really great way to do that. Here we see XRP Intel, which I mentioned before, which xrpintel.com, which we provide visual access to a lot of our data that we derive from the XRP ledger, as well as API information, source code analysis, which you can see in the navigation on the left-hand screenshot. And here you can very quickly visualize metrics such as accounts created, transaction rate, fees paid, payments sent across the network, really all sorts of metrics that market makers will be interested in, that auditors, analysts, and a plethora of other users would be interested in as far as data from the network. Depending on the user, they might prefer an app, they might prefer a web app, they might prefer a published report, they might prefer data via social media. So on the right, you see one of our Twitter feeds, XRP Intel, but the I is a 1, so XRP1NTEL, that Twitter. And here we publish various statistics periodically in an automated fashion for consumption. Now, obviously, there are, we don't monetize this. It's somewhat hard to monetize social media and all that unless you're an influencer. But this is great from a publicity perspective. This is great from a branding and a marketing thing. And as you can see, these tweets are very well liked, and they're retweeted, and they're a good way to get the name out there and establish the brand. And lastly, but not least, when it comes to these data and aggregation services, make sure you give back, right? Blockchain is a very much open source oriented ecosystem. As I mentioned before, I don't know of any blockchain that's whose source code isn't open source, and people love this fact about it. So I'm not saying this is right. This needs to be applied to all your services and all your tools. But certainly consider releasing some subset of your tools and your libraries as open source technologies. There's a lot of great resources, GitHub, automated continuous integration systems, and all of that make it really easy to do so. This allows you to gain exposure into, for your brand, but also comes with the additional benefit of shared maintenance. What this means is that if your clients are relying on your proprietary solution, are solely relying on your proprietary solution, and something goes wrong, they have no choice but to come to you to fix it. Now, let's say you have other business priorities or so on and so forth. Well, you might not have the time to fix it at that moment, and that does not reflect well on your brand. If the problem is with an open source component, you can very well go to them and say, "Hey, listen, I would love to fix your problem. We don't have the time right now, but here's the source code, and perhaps one of your developers can take a look at it." They can perhaps submit a patch, and submitting and reviewing a patch often is quicker for the for yourself, for the author of the project, than it is to figure out a solution and to develop it and to test it and all of that. Especially if you have continuous integration, your client or whoever is contributing to the project, their changes will automatically be tested. If all flags are green, you can push the merge button and everyone benefits. We have released several open source tools and technologies around the XRP and the XLM ledger on our GitHub. Check us out, devnullprod at github.com. So I'd like to finish up and wrap up this presentation discussing real-time intelligence. A couple slides dedicated to that. Up to this point, we've talked about historical data and analytics, and real-time intelligence is another critical component of this ecosystem. Essentially allows to users and clients to drive immediate value and insights as market changes. And this is becoming increasingly important in this interconnected world. Similar to historical analysis, uptime and reliability are important factors. But on top of that, performance and scalability are additional considerations. Network spikes occur all the time, and often we don't know exactly when those occur. Some news in some part of the world may trigger, a lot of selling activity or selling activity on exchange, which may trigger a lot of on-ledger blockchain traffic. And now all of a sudden, your solution needs to keep up with this influx of data. The cloud is a really great resource for this, as oftentimes cloud providers allow you to scale up and scale down depending on your network activity and your resources. So whenever the spike in activity occurs, you can automatically allocate more virtual machines, more servers, more network bandwidth to satisfy those demands. And on the flip side, just as importantly, when the demand subsides, I have a question here. Just 1 second, sorry. Yes, when the demand decreases and subsides, you can turn off those machines, saving money, and which ultimately translates to your end budget, right? We have a couple providers. DevNull Productions have a couple of solutions in this sector. On the left, you see Zerp Tracker for XRP. On the right, you see Stracker for XLM. These are projects built around delivering intelligence and insights for the XRP and XLM ledgers in real time. You can set up alerts for activity that you're interested in, receive email, text message, API call alerts, and take them from there. Being your own bank has never been easier with the assistance of these technologies. And as far as future opportunities, well, this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to data intelligence services. DevNull Productions is always looking for marketing, funding, collaboration opportunities for synergy. And if any of this is interest of you for a client's perspective as an investor or a developer that's looking for a collaboration opportunity, feel free to reach out anytime, and we're eager to talk. Again, my name is Mo Morsi. I'm founder and CEO of DevNull Productions. devnullprod.com is the website. devnullproductions@gmail.com is the email address, and would love to hear any questions.
Hey, what's up? Can you hear me?
Hey, not a lot. How you doing?
Oh, great. Yeah, I was just listening in, and I was like, I had a bunch of questions, but I really was excited to see a lot of really cool memes in your slides there. It was great.
Perhaps that should have been step 7, include memes.
Include memes. Yeah, that's the number one. It's it was great. And so do you have any words for people who are participating in the hackathon and how to quickly scale with these types of architectures?
Developing and deploying systems that can be run in parallel are really important and critical.
Okay.
One of our first examples when we were showing how to interface with the blockchain, you subscribe to transactions, and those examples, they're kind of pseudocode, if you will. I mean, they're actual code, but we simplified it. As any developer knows, there's a lot of edge cases that need to be addressed. Whenever you subscribe, whenever you pull in data from a network, in your callback, you don't want to launch a costly operation. So, for
Yes.
example, in our first example, we listen to ledgers and then we automatically retrieve the data from the ledger, from the blockchain, the full data set. Most likely, you'll want to, when you receive notification of that activity, kind of store it in a queue, kind of push it onto a queue so that you can resume listening to the network activity, and then in a parallel process do other work. So, for example, pulling in the full data set. And this sort of design patterns, this sort of behavior allows you to scale. You know, you can have multiple processes running on multiple machines, operating on the different subsets of data. You know, each can be kind of fine-tuned and isolated, if you will, so that as the blockchain scales, your services also scale.
Yeah, I saw you speak a lot about Redis. I try to include that inside my architectures. I thought it was really cool. Do you have any other thoughts on like that usage and new stuff that you saw?
I really love Redis. It's a great technology. You know, we use it for a lot, almost all our APIs or web APIs. You know, it's really easy to set up, really easy to configure. Certainly, it's not the only one. Memcached. There's a lot of NoSQL solutions, MongoDB, and it depends. It really needs to be taken on a case by case basis. Really understanding your business requirements, understanding the constraints of your clients, what they, the amount of queries that they need to issue, the delivery mechanisms, maintaining regular communication with clients and your developers. That's a challenging aspect of it, but a critical one too.
Yeah, it's because like something that I definitely have noticed is that since we have applications that are relying on things like a blockchain, like its speed is not its strongest it's not its strongest element, and pre-caching those things makes it a lot easier for you to have that, whether it's dealing with a traditional database or dealing with like a node perhaps.
Mhm. Exactly.
So when I was like watching your slides, you had a lot of really good code examples. You had a GitHub link for those who are looking at? Let me post
Yes.
if you can post it in
That's
chat. Then I'll
all
make
right.
sure that everyone who's participating in the hackathon gets their hands on it, and it'd be really great.
Definitely. I'll share these slides on our Twitter. If you go to DevNoProd on Twitter, for those that want to catch something, if I kind of went through it a little quick, feel
Yeah,
free to reach out.
that's the part. Like sometimes when you have a live stream, it's difficult to really dive in the way that you want, and that's kind of like why I think that having these speakers is pretty important, so we can see it, try it, and work it out for yourself, and uh, you know basically participate inside of a collaborative effort. Question: Have you? When was the last time interacted with a hackathon, or have you done hackathons in your recent memory?
It's been a little while. I certainly have
Hmm.
done plenty in my career. I used to be an engineer at Red Hat myself,
Oh, okay.
um, and started a hackerspace back in the day, and various other things. So it's it's in my blood. A developer, engineer by nature. Certainly running the startup these days, have to wear the marketing hat and business hat and all of that.
Oh,
But
for sure. Yeah, I'm over
yeah,
here I'm trying to be tech lead, and then I'm like, oh well, we have to run a live stream. I'm like, oh, here I am. So it's like when you have like another hat to wear, no problem. I'll be here live streaming with everybody, and I actually really think that's great just to be able to share it with everybody. And that's kind of what I saw, especially in cryptocurrency conventions. I definitely liked the North American Bitcoin conference when I was in person. And but one things that I saw out of that was a definite need to bring up the developer presence, because I was like, all right, that's a developer. I was like surrounded by suits, but everybody is looking for these teams, looking for engineers to actually outfit their project, and there's a severe dearth, not just in blockchain, but across the board.
Sure, sure. It's my father used to say, everything is easy until you do it, and
Yes.
developing is no exception to that. As is the marketing and business, but these are all critical roles in the ecosystem, and props to those who fulfill these roles successfully. It's no easy feat.
Yeah, because you see every project, there's hundreds or maybe thousands of ICOs that came in through the years, and really like the only that is the lifeblood of these projects are people who are actually going to go out there and build them. So
Mhm.
it's definitely like I believe it's a good burden to bear because it's like we're in the 90s again, and you can't even pay for that. And when you have
Yeah,
that idea that we're in the 90s in terms of how these technologies connect to each other, then you have the freedom to really innovate.
completely agree. Completely agree. It's one of the exciting things about the blockchain ecosystem and the cryptocurrencies and all this is it really does feel like the early days of the internet. And you know, even though I was young, I was too young. Perhaps even the early days of the digital revolution in the '80s. Of course, it's an
Yes.
infant then, so I don't remember it firsthand. But it's that notion of kind of exploring what's possible, and if you can dream it, you can build it, type of thing. And it's really exciting time to be part of this
Yeah,
ecosystem.
and then you kind of see that we can actually just take all the lessons that we've learned and like accelerate quickly because it seems like uh you know a friend of mine Nevin, he was always talking about what else do we know, what did we learn, and some of the problems that we face inside the blockchain space have kind of had their similar like analogies in other markets. So we have to take those lessons learned so we can iterate faster and experiment. That's I think that's the whole, I guess, ethos behind just having a hackathon in general.
Absolutely. What's old is new, and what's new is old.
That's what I keep on telling everybody. I was like, when we're talking about blockchain engineers and whatnot, so like I keep on telling the guys, it was like, hey, when we're talking about blockchain engineers, like people want to come to the blockchain center and learn this type of development, most of the time I'm just reiterating skills of tr- tr- traditional development, the type
Mm.
of things that you speak about, like the continuous integrations, the architectures of these different applications. They they are very close in that we're adding new elements to add strength and security in a way that we've never experienced before.
You said it. Completely agree.
Great. Yeah, I really wanted to thank you for coming out. And let's see what we have. Who we have at? Yeah, we have Carla. There we go. So thank you for coming by. And I really wanted to, hop on and just ask some questions. Do we have anyone from chat? I don't see one on YouTube. Oh, I think we have another. We have Laney. He wants to step in and say hello. Okay. There
Sure.
you go.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Hey, no problem. Let's switch the camera over and let's see. Be right there.
Hey Mo, I just wanted to say hi again. Great
Hey, how you doing?
presentation. I loved your memes. A very important part of the education. But thank you so much for joining us, and a big thank you from everyone at the Blockchain Center.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. Looking forward to the next time.
Of course.